Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Biology Bios. My name is Jim Edelman. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Memphis. And my purpose with this podcast is really twofold. First, to remind everybody that most Thursdays during the semesters at 4 p.m. in Ellington Hall, we have guest speakers giving talks about their research in all sorts of different areas of biology, so please come and check those out. The other thing is to have those people on here and get to know them a little bit before they give those talks. So we'll be asking them what gets them super excited about their biology, about their research, and hear their advice for younger biologists, folks who are coming up in the sciences right now. I will say that I stole these questions shamelessly from Rhett Miller's great podcast called Wheels Off, so please check that out as well. But without further ado, let's get to our guest this week. Thanks so much for tuning in. Dr. Vanessa Ezenwa, thank you so much for talking with me, and welcome to Biology Bios.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm excited to chat with you, and I'm also excited about my upcoming visit.
Excellent. Yeah, well, we are also excited. And so just to kind of orient folks, I thought maybe you could introduce yourself real quickly, like where you are, your sort of main interests in biology.
Okay, so I am a professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at Yale University. And I guess the general scope of what I study is I study the ecology and evolution of infectious diseases. Um, uh, I guess one way to say that is that I mainly am interested in how hosts and parasitic organisms interact in wild natural systems.
Very cool. So speaking of those wild natural systems, can you tell me about one, maybe two projects that you have going now that you're particularly excited about, what those are and why are you jazzed about them?
Okay, yes. Probably two main projects that I'll talk about are sort of two research themes in my lab that I've actually been studying for a long time. So they just keep going. So the first one sort of encompasses sort of a phenomenon called co-infection. And this is essentially where a single individual host might be infected with multiple parasites at the same time. Traditionally, whether it's in human disease work or laboratory animal work or work on infectious diseases in veterinary animals, the focus has historically been on looking at a single parasite infecting an individual. But in reality, individuals have multiple simultaneous infections. So my lab has been interested in this topic for several years. And in particular, we're interested in wormy things. So in helminths, they're called helminths. So worms and how these worms influence and interact with microbial type pathogens that might co-infect the same host. So things like bacteria and viruses. And one of the things that I find fascinating about co-infection are really sort of some of the cryptic ways in which the presence of one pathogen can have sort of far-reaching impacts on another. So we're currently studying this idea focused on intestinal worms and bovine tuberculosis. which is a pathogen that actually sort of resides in the lungs. So even these very two different types of organisms can interact and influence sort of the disease process in hosts. The second theme that my lab has worked on for a while is sort of understanding how animal behaviors shape infectious disease processes in hosts. And in particular, we've been quite interested in social behaviors. So just social interactions between organisms. Historically, both in human epidemiology and in the study of animal diseases, and I'm sure everyone is aware of this now following the COVID-19 pandemic, social interactions can be this really important sort of driver of the transmission of infectious diseases from one host to another. So we've studied those kind of interactions, and more recently, we're also interested in how social behavior can influence physiology and immunity in ways that might be protective as well. And so this is sort of this, so the net kind of consequences of social interactions on one hand might make you more prone to get infected, but on the other hand might actually protect you potentially by boosting things like your ability to physiologically resist parasites.
Super
So that's
cool
my
stuff.
summary.
Oh, no, that's such neat stuff. And yeah, those connections between behavior. I mean, you and I have talked about this at length before, but those connections between behavior and disease are just so neat how those causal arrows can go both ways. Yeah.
I know it's very fascinating.
And for folks, so you mentioned the bovine tuberculosis, but you're not working in like domestic cattle, right? You're or is there something that I don't know?
No, yes, so that's true. So for all of these things that I talked about, we study wild animals, and in particular, we study wild ungulates. So like the relatives of domestic cattle, sheep, and goats, but the wild ones. So our work on bovine tuberculosis is actually uh, focused on African buffalo, which are actually a very close relative of cattle.
Yeah, and that's some that's some field work right there. I mean, right? Because this is the stuff that you're doing in Kruger National Park in South Africa, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I a question that often comes up when I when I talk about our work is, well, how do you test a wild buffalo for tuberculosis? So obviously, to draw a blood sample and test this animal requires first to catch it. And so what's really exciting for us is that we get to work with veterinarians and others, people who specialize in sort of the capture and handling of big game in our field sites to catch these animals and be up close, right, in sampling them. So that's always an exciting part of our work.
Yeah, absolutely. And some pretty interesting ecology to do that in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit, I wanted to ask you if there was a time when you knew that you wanted to be a scientist. Like, was it a gradual thing, or was there an aha moment, or generally, kind of how did you end up chasing wild buffalo for your job?
Yes, yeah. So I would say that, early on, I definitely, was interested in, um, I don't know if I would call it science, but in nature, right? So like as a kid, I collected rocks and had a rock collection. I, collect like whatever you could do outside, I kind of did it. And so I was really interested in sort of biological things. So ultimately, I started as an undergrad as a pre-med because I thought, okay, well, I'm interested in biology. These are the subjects I really liked in high school.
Yeah.
So what can you do with a biology degree? Well, you can go into human medicine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but so an interesting factoid is that even though I thought, okay, well, this is a way that I can use biology, I always thought, like I don't actually think in thinking about what a physician does, I didn't think I would like it actually. So it was this weird duality, right? Where I thought, I really like biology, but I don't really think that I want to work with patients every day. You know,
Yeah.
and so as in undergrad, actually taking first sort of the ecology section of intro biology, which we skipped that part in my 2 years of biology in high school. Like I never heard of ecology,
Yeah.
actually, um, was like eye opening. And I thought, oh, this is so interesting and exciting, right? And it really so I guess that was when I really match something I was learning to just liking biology in general. Um, and then it really was, after that, I sort of started taking more classes that were in the sort of ecology evolution part of our biology degree. So I took animal behavior actually. And in the lab, we were so part of that class, you had to do a project. And essentially, the instructor said, you can go and do whatever you want.
Oh,
And
nice.
it was fascinating. And so I did a project that looked at sort of house finch coloration, male colors, and how that, right, in success on the nests during breeding. There were house finches on campus that nested in trees. And I just thought this is amazing. So I got to read primary literature about this topic, come up with hypotheses, walk around campus trying to collect data. And I was just fascinated. I was hooked. And I
That's
thought,
so
wow,
cool.
this is what I would like to do. And in fact, it was the first time of really understanding that this is something you could do and it could be your job. And
Yeah.
you could just figure things out about animals in the natural world. So
Yeah. Somebody
um,
pays you to do that,
I
right?
know exactly. That's exactly what I thought. So it changed the course of what I sort of I was still as a biology major, but it really changed my outlook on what I wanted to do after um, my undergraduate degree.
That's very neat. And wow, I did not know that house finches were a gateway species for you.
They were, I know.
I'm really happy about that. I was just talking to Jeff Hill. Was Jeff Hill and Wendy Hood were visiting, so we just had a house finch. Well, not totally house finch themed, but like somewhat house finch themed talk today. So there's some good house finch stuff going on here today.
Yeah, and it's funny because as in undergrad, it was papers by people like Jeff Hill that I read in my animal behavior class, thinking, oh, the colors are signals to females, and they might acquire these colors from what they're eating. It was
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
that's so neat. Um, okay, so this one, every time I try to ask it, I struggle a little bit. Um, it's is a little, I mean, it's not super personal, don't worry. Um, but I think about this because there's so much criticism that we face as academics. We get our papers reviewed, our grants reviewed. But at least I have like also the inner critic that like I have an idea and then the inner critic is like, dude, that's not a very good idea. And I think you have to kind of struggle through that and you have to come to terms with your inner critic. And I wonder if you have any advice for listeners about your experience with that, and what do you do about that voice in your head, and how have you made peace with it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah. Huh. Um, I guess what I would say is that I feel like that my inner critic is not right. It's not completely a bad thing and it's not completely a good thing, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's sort of like it's a necessary thing to some extent. So I guess let me explain that. I would say that in this job, there's too much to ever do, right? Or to ever accomplish or finish, right? So like as a um in this field, you can have new ideas could come to you like every day, or you read something and it triggers this idea or that, but there's just like too much to do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so one important thing I have learned, I think, over the years is thinking, okay, like I actually don't have to try to accomplish everything. And so I think my inner critic helps um, weed through the ideas and say, okay, well, here are the ones that, are maybe the most promising or the most in line with where I want to go. So I feel like that voice helps me sift through a lot of noise
Yeah.
on the
That's
one
a
hand.
great point.
But on the other hand, I do think that it also maybe sort of I have to continue, I have to sometimes talk myself into doing things, which is sort of like I just should have done instead of like
Yeah.
taking, you know, like just thinking about it. So that's where I would say the inner critic sort of um puts a pause on things that shouldn't really be, paused,
Yeah.
because it's sort of like, well, this is not ready, or this is not, whatever it is. So I think it's sort of on balance, it's a good thing, but uh, because it helps sift through things. But on the other hand, I do feel like I have to work it sort of saying, okay, I'm just going to do this.
Yeah. 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 I mean, like so many things, right? There's a middle ground. There's an
Yeah,
optimality
exactly.
solution. Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot. Um, so one other question that's sort of similar, but broader. So thinking about yourself in your science journey, and if you were to meet like an undergrad version of yourself in today's world of science and biology, what advice would you give that person?
Oh, I think the advice I would give them is to really do what they what they're most interested in, like what really excites them the most, um what makes them the happiest at that time. Um and I think probably people get that advice all the time, but I'll give an example as to why I think that's the most important advice. So I told the story about, I was a pre-med and then I discovered this, you know, the world of animal behavior.
Yeah.
And then fast forward, right? I joined a PhD program in ecology and evolutionary biology, but that I think sort of blows past the angst that was right
Ah,
in between that of saying, okay, like I really like this, but here for all these years, I've had this plan, or that this was what I was going to do. And how can I just do this other thing? So it took me a long time to think about, okay, what do I really want to do? And in the end, and not feel bad about changing what I was
yeah.
doing, or right. Um and so in the end, though, that was obviously, to me now, in hindsight, the best thing I could ever done. And so I always think, what if I had like, caved to all the pressure at the time,
Mhm.
and continued on that path that I came into undergrad doing. um it just would have been terrible, right? Not that obviously being a physician is a wonderful career and whatever, but it's not for me.
Yeah.
And I think that, even though it was hard at the time and sort of, a curveball for me anyway, at the time, that it was important that I followed like I found something, I was excited by it. And at the end of the day, no matter what anyone said, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And it's like the best decision career-wise that I have made.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It's hard. I mean, and I also think it comes back to that balance that you talked about with that inner critic of like, there's this you're worrying about these things, and at some point you got to just be like, nope, I'm doing it.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
my gut
Yes.
says that I really like this, and I don't know. My dad always would say like, as long as it doesn't scare the horses, like go ahead and do it.
That's
Like,
a great one. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, so even though no matter it, like at some point you just have to, yeah, like you said, follow the voice inside that says this is what you want, just go for it. Um, because everyone has opinions, but in some instances it is the case that it's your opinion that counts the most.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, all right. So one sort of final question, which is kind of to throw it back at you, is are there things that I haven't asked you about that you wish I would have asked you about?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. All right. I like that.
Okay,
We
exactly.
hit on the good stuff. No, uh but I do I like I said, we generally ask these same questions. We get very different answers, and I want to make sure that yeah, if there was other stuff that we hit on that too. But yeah, thank you so much for the time. It's been lovely to hear about this. This is actually, I mean, we've known each other for a while now, and I learned a whole bunch of things about you just now, which is really cool. And we're definitely all excited about your visit here. Look forward to hearing more about the work. And yeah, I will let you get ready for your trip over to Kenya.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the interview. It was fun to talk about. And so, what I would add, I'm always nervous to give like things like this, but one, I've known you for a long time, as it said, it flowed perfectly. So,
Oh,
so
good.
thanks for the advice beforehand.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, we'll see you in just a couple weeks.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much to my guest this week, Dr. Vanessa Ezenwa. You can hear more about her work and all the wormy things in African buffalo that she mentioned next week, March 28th, 2024 at 4 p.m. in Ellington Hall. Looking forward to seeing you there.